Are you a player who's looking at playing a Wild Magic Sorcerer? Are you a DM who has a player that wants to play a Wild Magic Sorcerer? Or are you maybe just Wild Magic Sorcerer curious? Then this is the video for you. So in the player's handbook for 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons, there is a sorcerer subclass called Wild Magic. It is probably one of my favorite subclasses in all of Dungeons & Dragons, and if you're familiar with the subclass, you'll know why. But for those who are not familiar with the subclass, here's a brief rundown of how it works. You have the chance for random shit to just happen to you, to your friends, maybe even to your enemies, just by playing the class. Any number of things can happen, from turning into a potted plant, to casting a 3rd level fireball centered on yourself, to doing nothing but breathing pink bubbles, and an enormous amount of other things can go wrong or right. Now this in itself is the best reason, and probably the vast majority of people who are playing the subclass are playing it because of this reason. You want wild magic to go off. You want ridiculous shit to happen. That is the biggest driving feature of picking this subclass. However, if you play the class as written, it's not that great. And this is why. In the player's handbook, the couple of features are stated as the following. Starting when you choose this origin as 1st level, your spellcasting can unleash surges of untamed magic. The DM can have you roll a d20 immediately after you cast a sorcerer spell of 1st level or higher. If you roll a 1, roll on the Wild Magic Surge table to create a magical effect. This, the way it's worded, is stupid, because the way that it's written in here states that after you cast a spell, the DM can make you roll a d20. And then if you roll a 1 on the d20, you then have to roll on the Wild Magic Surge table. The problem with this is that immediately before you even start your first session of Dungeons & Dragons, you don't know when this is going to happen, because it explicitly states that the DM can. Well, can is essentially the same as may, meaning it doesn't have to happen all the time. So now you, the player, are stuck in limbo of, well, every time I cast a spell, when am I rolling this d20 to see if I roll a 1 to see if wild magic happens? And the DM is also like, well, when do I make them roll that d20 to see if they roll a 1 to see if wild magic happens? The vast majority of DMs that I found online simply state that for this subclass, when a player of theirs takes it, they just make them roll the d20 after they cast a spell every single time. Anytime they cast a spell, boom, roll that d20, see if you roll a 1 after every single spell. And this, to me, makes sense. This is the wildly most popular version of this, just to make them do it every single time. There are some DMs, however, that pick and choose when, and this, to me personally, is not a great idea, because now your player is in complete limbo of when it's going to happen, because it's now completely up to the DM to choose. And now a couple things can go wrong. 1, your DM could just forget that this is a feature of yours and then never make you roll the d20 after you cast a spell. Or 2, the DM picks and chooses when it's like a high profile moment, or when it would be funny for it to happen, or during a really emotional scene and he just wants to, twist it to a weird way. Then they will say, hey, roll the d20 to see if Wild Magic Surge goes off, and they will just pick and choose the moments that they want. I personally, as a DM, do not like this version, because your player is stuck in limbo wondering when the DM is going to think it is favorable for wild magic to go off. They could always choose for you to roll that d20 only during moments where it's not going to affect the party that greatly, like it's during downtime activities and there's nothing too major can happen, or they will only ever pick when it could do something horribly wrong and it's during high profile activities, and that's when they pick and choose for it to happen. However, at the core of all of this, Wild Magic Surge only goes off if you roll a 1 on a 20-sided die. And this, to me, is not that great of odds. 1 out of 20 is not super high. It's a 5% chance for Wild Magic Surge to go off. And like we said at the beginning of this video, the reason you're playing Wild Magic Sorcerer is because you want wild magic to go off. So this is a system that I've created, that I have got a lot of ideas off the internet to build for this system, and it doesn't change Wild Magic Sorcerer all that much. It just makes it better, and it makes it more fun for the player, and there's less confusion for both the DM and the player. And I'm currently have a player who is using Wild Magic Sorcerer in Curse of Strahd, and we both loved this system so far. Here's how it works. Right off the hop, you never decide when the player rolls the d20. it always happens after you cast a spell, similar to the most wildly accepted version of this. However, the player now has a counter with them, and the counter always starts at 1. Every time they cast a spell of first level or higher, they roll the d20. They now have to see if they roll a number equal to their counter or lower. After a long rest, their counter starts at 1. If they cast a spell of first level, they roll the d20 before even casting the spell. If the d20 lands on a 2 or higher, then nothing happens and their regular spell is cast. However, the counter now goes up by the amount of levels equal to the spell they cast. So they cast a first level spell, that counter now goes up to 2. The next time that player casts a spell, they roll the d20 before the spell goes off, but now they need to roll a 3 or higher. If they roll a 2 or lower, Wild Magic goes off. So let's say the player now casts a 4th level spell. Before the spell goes off, they roll the d20. They roll a 5. It's not a 2, so nothing happens. The spell goes off as normal, but now this counter goes up by 5. So now their counter went from a 2 to a 7. So now the next time that player casts a spell, they roll the d20, and now they have to roll an 8 or higher. If they roll a 7 or lower, Wild Magic goes off. You get the idea? This creates a way that every time you cast a spell during your time, the risk of wild magic steadily goes up as you continuously draw the magic out of your body and cast the spells. And the higher level spells, the higher the risk and the more risk that goes off during the entire day. Until the point where you start to get up to a counter of 10, now there's a 50-50 chance that when you cast your next spell, on an 11 or higher, you're fine, but on a 10 or lower, wild magic is happening. This counter resets after a couple of different factors. 1, you cast wild magic, the counter then resets back to 1. 2, you finish a long rest, the counter then resets back to 1. This, in my opinion, makes it so the DM is never guessing and choosing when the player has to roll on their wild magic or to see if wild magic goes off. This also gives the player a lot more control over the wild magic, and it's also just more fun because it inevitably invokes more and more and more risk as the day goes on. Or even during a combat encounter where they're constantly casting spells, they need to choose if they're going to cast higher level spells or lower level spells to raise that counter up even higher or lower. And then once that counter gets even to a high enough point where they feel like it's slowly going to become inevitable that wild magic's going to go off, now the player at least has a little bit more room to choose where they're standing in the event that they cast a 3rd level fireball on themselves or what they're doing, because if they know that it's probably going to happen on my next spell, they can now plan for it and act accordingly. And this gives the player more room to work with and the knowledge that, hey, ridiculous shit is probably going to happen the next time I cast Magic Missile. Be ready and ready themselves for it. All in all, I think this is a terrific change to this subclass, and like I said before at the beginning of this video, I've been running this subclass with a player of mine in Curse of Strahd, and they're level 6 right now, and they're loving it. I'm loving it. It's been a hell of a time. So I encourage you, if you are a player looking at playing Wild Magic Sorcerer or a DM who wants to change this subclass so that it fits this way, go ahead, use it, and let me know in the comments down below what you think about it. If you want to talk about this subclass a little bit more or anything Dungeons & Dragons or fantasy related, you can follow me on Twitch. I'm usually live every Monday, Tuesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Or hey, leave a comment down below on this YouTube video and I will be sure to reply back to it. Or if you can't be bothered with either one of those two, there's a link to my Instagram and Twitter down below if you wish to follow me and contact me there. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, tell your friends. If you didn't, you tell me. Have yourself a good one, everybody. Skål.